Hey guys, it's Spencer. I went ahead and did my paper on coevolutionary relationships, and I was having some trouble with my screen share. When I'd go to start my PowerPoint, it wouldn't show my PowerPoint. It wouldn't keep up with me. It would just stay frozen on the introduction page. So I'm going to try something else, and I'm just going to hope you guys can see enough of the slides. I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Okay, so yeah, like I said, it's coevolutionary relationships. Just as an introduction, coevolution can be defined as two or more species in mutually reciprocating and exclusive ecological relationship. And one kind of classic example that's in a lot of textbooks and is talked about quite a bit, and it kind of it's kind of like the first bit of evidence we have of coevolution came from Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, which was of course founded around the 1800s, 1900s. And it was a British company, and so when people started coming across to the New World, they quickly realized that fur trading and the pelt business was huge. And so these are records of the pelts that they actually had. And so as you can see here, we have our snowshoe hare in blue and our lynx in red. So for this example, our snowshoe hare spikes way up to here. And we see that the population must have been huge that year, right? And so now when biologists go back and look at it, we can see that the lynx population the few years before was so low that it allowed for these hares to kind of just grow out of control. And so when we go back and look at just records of pelts, we can kind of look at how these species are co-evolved together and how they match each other. And so while this is a predator-prey relationship, I'll actually be talking about the mutually exclusive or the mutually beneficial relationships. So I'll be talking about plant and pollinator coevolution. Just kind of a general statements about my paper. I think at least when I think of pollinators, I think of insects, but I have an example of a mammal and a bird to throw in there. And my plants are going to be predominantly trees, but there are going to be some perennials, tropical flowers and such. So first one is acacia trees and acacia ants. And the way I organize this is that the tree or plant will be on the left and the animal will be on the right. And I'm going to list what the organism is getting, what they're receiving in this relationship underneath them. So the acacia tree is also known as the bullhorn or the swollen thorn acacia tree. And what they get from the ants is protection. So the ants will, they'll kind of fend off and attack other harmful insects that could hurt the tree, burrow into it and whatnot. And they also attack mammals such as, let's say like a giraffe or a cow is going to come up and start eating some leaves. The ants will actually go out and start biting it so that it backs off and gets away from its host. The plants also receive little to no competition, meaning that ants will also, along with attacking insects and mammals, if there's another tree, touching, coming in contact with their canopy, they'll go and start biting those leaves too to, just ensure that their tree's not being, it's not losing any resources, it's not losing any nutrients to any other organisms. So another cool observation is that around trees that will have colonies of acacia ants is that it's almost completely clean on the floor. For example, if a seedling pops up from another tree, the ants will go down and they'll cut it down so that ensuring that their tree is going to get the most nutrients. And the ants in this relationship will get these food source from Beltian bodies, and I have a picture of those in just a second. But what they are is they're these little yellow bodies on leaves that contain sugary nectars. And then, of course, I mentioned to this before, is that they get a home base or a colony. And the way they do that is they actually kind of carve out holes inside these hollow thorns. And in doing that, it doesn't cause any damage to the trees. So in this picture, you can see that there's a hole right here, and there's another hole down here. And then we have these little yellow Beltian bodies, which are just sugary nectars. And so it has been shown that these species are now so, I guess, they're so just knit tightly is that these trees can't actually survive without the ants anymore, and these ants aren't going to live without the trees. They become so interdependent on one another. Next example is another insect. So we have figs and pollinator wasps. These pollinator wasps, there's multiple species, and so they kind of narrow it down to the family Achaeonidae wasps. And then figs in this particular study was Ficus sycamores. And so the figs are pollinated, by these wasps. So if you can see in this picture, the wasp will go in and they will actually oviposit, meaning that they'll lay their eggs. They use this tube-like reproductive organ. You can kind of see some of them. And they will penetrate the fruit and they lay their eggs in there. And as they do that, they pick up pollen from the figs. And so when they jump from fig to fig, tree to tree, they're transferring that pollen. And those figs, that's the only way they're pollinated now. These wasps, in return, they're given a place to oviposit, right? They're given a safe place to lay their eggs, and when those eggs hatch, the larvae immediately have a food supply. And then when those larvae leave the figs, they're taking the pollen as well and taking it to other figs. So those two species have become interdependent and mutually exclusive to one another. The next example is another insect. It's a yucca moth, and it has co-evolved with the Joshua tree. So unlike the figs, the Joshua tree doesn't produce a nectar or a fruit or something to attract other pollinators. The only thing it offers is a suitable place for the moths to oviposit, so lay their eggs. And it's the moths are the only pollinators for the Joshua trees, and they're moths of the genus Tegedicula. These moths are then, just like the wasps, they're given a place to oviposit, and their young can develop safely, and they're provided with food supply. So it's pretty similar to the wasps, and once again, they become mutually exclusive to one another. So here's an example of a Joshua tree. So you can see, it's not something you think of as attractive for, bugs or birds or whatnot to come and pollinate, but they do have these flowers when they blossom that these moths can come in and penetrate right here, and they can start laying their eggs. Next, so now we're kind of going away from the insects. I have the Xanthus hummingbird and Texas madrones, which are a tree. The unique thing about this study is that both of these species are endemic to Baja California Sur. Endemic meaning that they're exclusive to that area, and I'll show you a picture with Baja California Sur on the map. But anyways, the tree, of course, they actually have unique constricted flowers that can't be pollinated by other organisms, but these hummingbirds have found a way around that because their beaks are such a unique shape that they can actually pollinate the flowers. And so these flowers now, they strictly require these hummingbirds for pollination because no other pollinators have really figured them out. So in return, these hummingbirds now have an exclusive relationship that they can exploit these flowers for nutrients, and they don't have any competition. And the other important thing is that the Texas madrone trees, they bloom year-round, which is essential for the hummingbirds because they're going to need a food supply during the winter months. And so these two endemic species are kind of trapped together, so they've learned to co-evolve together. And here's a picture of our Xanthus hummingbird. You can see the beak. And we have our blossoms for the Texas madrone tree, and then over here we have the study area of Baja California Sur. So as you can see, these green areas are going to indicate nice vegetation areas, but then they're surrounded by ocean on one side and desert on the other side. So they're in pockets together. So they've evolved because they know that they're going to have a reliable partner. So now that we've had some insects and then we had a bird example, we now have a mammal example. So the tube-lipped nectar bat, Ganora fistulata, and the central pogon nigricans, which is a tropical flower, have co-evolved. And in this example, the flower actually evolved first to gain this long corolla, and the nectar's down here at the bottom, and nothing else could reach the nectar to pollinate it except for these bats, because they in turn, as a selective pressure, evolved these thoracic glossal tubes. And what they do is they allow for the bat to store its tongue down here in its thoracic cavity rather than being restricted to its jaw size like all the other bats. And so because they were able to evolve to match the flowers, now they have a mutually exclusive relationship where these flowers require the bats to pollinate and the bats require the flowers for food. And so the pollen will actually come out right here on the bat's head, and as the bat goes from flower to flower, it'll leave some pollen behind. So they have co-evolved together once again. And then my last example is between the leaf flower tree and leaf flower moth. This one's very unique too because it talks about co-radiation, and I'll get into that in a second. the leaf flower trees from the Glochidian genera, and then our leaf flower moths are from our Epicephala genera. And so once again, as we saw in the other insects, the tree is getting pollinated, and they're solely pollinated by Epicephal moths. And so back to the co-radiation, these trees are kind of island hopping throughout Southeast Polynesia. And so for them to do that, they need something to pollinate them along the way. And these leaf flower moths follow them throughout the islands, and they're their sole pollinators. And so as the other examples were more in like constant, unchanging environments, this one is, they're island hopping and they're able to keep up with each other. And the Epicephala, for example, they get another place to oviposit, which we've learned about. So you can see right here how it's ovipositing into this bud. And it's the sole place that these moths will oviposit. And then they're also given their food supply from the flowers that will bloom. So now to my conclusions. Just kind of a general statement, coevolution is shown to be a formidable and effective mode of evolution. It's been picking up a lot of steam lately. People are starting to recognize more relationships, more coevolutionary relationships that are mutually exclusive, and so it's becoming a bigger topic. One of the reasons why scientists believe it to be happening is it may be initiated in nature due to selective pressures. So like we saw with the bat, the tube-lip nectar bat, and the flower develops such a long corolla that nothing else can pollinate it, and the bats evolve to kind of fit that niche, and it's such a mutually exclusive relationship that they've now co-evolved to need each other to live. Another reason why is species might begin these relationships in order to eliminate competition. So if we use our example of the endemic species with the Xanthus hummingbird and the Texas madrone, they're endemic, and so they're kind of locked up to each other, and they're in like confined areas, if you will. And so these individuals have learned, well, we're stuck together, so we might as well, co-evolve together. There's a reliable relationship there. So the trees don't have to compete, to get other pollinators to come to them if they have one unique pollinator that will come to them. And then those pollinators know that they don't have to fight, or they don't have to go find other trees, for example, because they know that they have an exclusive relationship with a certain tree. And just kind of one last note is that these coevolutionary relationships most certainly can be mutually beneficial. They don't have to be parasitic, or like in our example about the lynx and the hare, predator-prey. They can definitely be mutually beneficial. They can co-evolve together. And then kind of one last summary is that it can happen under a variety of circumstances and ecosystems. So we talked about the endemic species, we talked about the co-radiation in the Polynesian islands, and one last kind of note would be that it seems to be more common in constant, unchanging environments, and it's probably just due to reliability. They know that two species can kind of link up together and stay together. And then lastly, I guess I have my references. So I have my my article references for my paper, and then I have my picture references. But I think that's about it. So thanks for watching, guys.